Greetings, everyone. I am Sandra Banks, the CEO for the International Dyslexia Association, and I just want to welcome you today. For all of you that are on Facebook and YouTube, welcome, welcome, welcome. Today begins what we hope to be a series of webinars to be able to help anyone in the community that will need help in these times where we are weathering this COVID-19 pandemic. We hope that you would find these webinars useful, and we are very much open to any suggestions that you may have of webinars that you may want to see in the future. Before we get started, I have a few announcements to make so that we could make sure that this webinar goes smoothly and also get some of your questions answered. First and foremost, we are hosting a series of topics. We received an overwhelming amount of questions for this particular topic alone. But what we're going to do is also take a look at some of the questions that were sent that may not necessarily complement this particular webinar, but may complement a webinar in the future. Our goal is not to duplicate. So as we look out into the community and see great webinars going on, we will continue to forward those webinars to you through our website and our e-blast. But our hope is to design webinars that are highly demanded by you, the community. So our next 3 webinars, we already have scheduled the topics. And so just wanted to kind of give you a rundown of what those topics are. We will be talking about how to advocate for your child. Our next topic will be also part 2 of this particular topic, where we will focus more on innovative teaching strategies. This particular topic today is going to focus on how we can serve our teachers and educators, and what are some of the things that we need to have in place to make sure that they have the resources that they need and the tools that they need. But we will have a part 2 to this webinar where we actually discuss, for those of you that are interested, innovative teaching strategies. And on April the 27th, which is our next upcoming webinar, we're going to talk about things that you should know about assistive technology during distance learning. So stay tuned for more of our webinars. Continue to check our website, continue to follow us on our social media. And again, we send out e-blasts twice a week to keep everyone informed. Now the good stuff. So the good stuff is we have all these giveaways and prizes that we promised you. So we're not going to draw for the prizes today. We will draw for the prizes first thing in the morning, and we will notify those of you who actually won a prize via email. After we notify you and you accept your prize, then we will post latter part of this week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, we will post who the winners are and what they won. Also, your resource guides that were promised to you, you all will receive those. If you registered, you receive those in your emails through an e-blast tomorrow. So look for that resource guide as around noon tomorrow or later. Our next announcement is many of you have hopefully seen our COVID relief fund for families and teachers. We launched this because we have been getting a lot of emails and phone calls related to assistance that our families and teachers need. And so IDA has launched a pretty aggressive campaign to make sure that we are taking care of our community in the ways that we should be taking care of them. So the Relief Fund campaign kicked off last week. It will run continuously as long as our families need help. We will run the campaign, but we want to encourage each of you after this particular webinar, if you are on YouTube, to go down to the link in the description and click on that link and make your donation. If you're on Facebook, there is a Facebook donate button that you can donate. This is a dollar campaign. It's a dollar drive. We know how stressing it can be right now, particularly with our economic situations. So we're not asking a lot. We are asking that the community unite as one. And if everyone could just donate $1, that would be so impactful. So we're encouraging you to donate $1 more through our Dollar Drive campaign to assist with the COVID Relief Fund. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Relief Fund will do a few things. There are so many families that do not have the resources. They don't have computers. They don't have Wi-Fi. It is very difficult during these times for them to their children to learn. And so we're going to be funding laptops and computers and desktops for families that need it. We will also be providing stipends for one-on-one tutoring. We have a lot of specialists and a lot of children that need that one-on-one attention. And so we will be providing stipends to pay for that. We will also be providing software and any kind of tools that our families and teachers need. A big shout out to Learning Ally, who has been a tremendous partner with IDA, and their tools and resources will be available through a partnership for free for those who need it and qualify. And last, the COVID Relief Fund will also take care of any stipends needed for advocacy work. We know that there are many parents out there, many of you who need that assistance from an advocate. And so we're open to providing stipends to pay for those type of services. So the COVID Relief Fund for IDA, again, kicked off last week. We hope that everyone would just go and make a donation as soon as this webinar is over. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce an awesome woman. I started IDA a year ago, and she was one of 5 names that came up all the time. And I've had an opportunity to really get to know Margie, and she's just great. She's very knowledgeable, and she's definitely an asset to our community. Dr. Margie Gillis is a certified academic language therapist. In 2009, she founded Literacy How, which provides professional development on how best to implement research-based reading practices in the classroom. Margie has been a longtime friend of IDA, and we are honored to have her. So I'm going to turn it over to Margie to start the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you for that nice introduction, Sanja, and very nice to be joining you all this afternoon, or perhaps this morning if you're calling from an earlier time zone. I am very honored to be asked to do this presentation, and I'm not sure, little disclaimer here, that I'm the best person to be sharing thoughts about innovative ways to teach online, because the truth of the matter is we, like you, have been, navigating uncharted territory, probably the best way to say this. And while we've talked about doing professional development virtually for quite some time, and as fate would have it, we actually started talking about doing virtual online coaching in earnest 6 months ago, and really started digging into the details about what that would look like. We were not expecting COVID-19 to escalate our need to reach out to teachers in this way. So we've learned a lot in the last month. We will learn a lot more, no doubt. And so I'm happy to share what I have learned. I also just want to say before I begin that, as Sanja mentioned, this presentation is really geared toward working with teachers. We certainly have had some experience, lots of experience collectively among the 10 or 12 mentors who work with me. We do and have provided individual tutoring and academic language therapy to many students over the years, but doing that virtually is new to us too. So I just want to acknowledge that I know this is challenging for all of you. I respect what you're trying to do. I applaud you for trying things out and just giving it a go. And that's how you learn, really. So we've made some mistakes along the way. We all will do that. We learn from those challenges, right? And so hopefully I can share some things with you today that will be valuable. I'd like to just give you a little bit of background on Literacy How. As Sanja mentioned, we started in 2009, building on the work that we did while I was at Haskins, and providing professional development for teachers to empower them with knowledge so that every child learns to read by 3rd grade. We know that they can, 95% of them should at least. We also subscribe to the philosophy that it is the teacher that teaches the child to read and not the program or the materials. So having a lot of knowledge makes a huge difference in student outcomes. So therefore, we empower teachers with the best ways to teach. Today, I'm going to provide a brief background on coaching and what our coaching model looks like, just so you have some context for what we do day to day. And then related to that, I'd like to talk about 4 main ideas. First, how important it is to know your audience. Second, how important it is to differentiate the support that you give teachers as you're virtually coaching them. And that's certainly true whether you're in the same room with them or using technology to support them. Third, engagement is key. So whatever rules of engagement you apply when you're face-to-face with teachers, I think those same rules apply. And so maybe I can share a few things that we've learned, again, most recently. And lastly, I'd like to talk about administrators and how critically important they are to the success of any professional development that you engage teachers in. So again, just to introduce you to our coaching model. And about a year ago, we came up with, we didn't come up with this, actually, we saw Simon Sinek's video, his YouTube video, talking about the golden circle and why we should start every conversation we have with teachers, with parents, with the general public about why we're doing what we're doing. What is the focus, right? What is driving us to do this, this work? And from there, we can get to the how. How do we do what we do? And finally, we end with what we do. So our coaching model really focuses in on the how we do our work, but I do want to recognize the why really quickly. The why we do our work is that we know 95% of children can be taught to read. And that includes children with dyslexia, children on the spectrum, children who have been disadvantaged because they speak English as a second language or possibly a 3rd language, or they haven't had the same learning opportunities that children from middle-class homes have. Whatever the circumstance, we know that 95% can be taught to read. And yet, only 65%, or I should say only 35%, do read on grade level. That means that 65% of our nation's children read below grade level. So that motivates us each and every day. Many of you have heard Louisa Moats coined the phrase, teaching reading is rocket. That is absolutely true. And if you are new to this field or you've been in this field for a while, I'm sure you can acknowledge that fact. The other piece of this coaching puzzle is that research on school change found that teachers needed to try a new technique 20 to 25 times before it became habitual or natural. So teachers need lots of practice to perfect what they do. And why is that? Well, Costa and Garmston, who actually were the 2 people that really characterized or identified and described what cognitive coaching is, said that teaching is one of the most cognitively complex professions. And why is that? Because we work in different schools with different backgrounds in different communities. Each community, each school has its own unique group of students. So what makes teaching challenging is the continual inquiry that must be pursued, the expansion of a teacher's repertoire of teaching methods, and an accumulation of knowledge through practice. And though today we're not going to focus on the what of what we do, certainly that is really critically important, that our teachers understand that they have the knowledge in all these content areas so that they can help their students and maximize their literacy skills. So this is our reading wheel, and it shows all the components of comprehensive literacy with oral language at the core. Now, you saw a quote from Joyce and Showers. This is another slide that I like to use and show people when I describe how important coaching is. I won't go into detail today because I'll run out of time for the meat of the matter, but what I want you to focus on here at the bottom right of this slide is that to get transfer to practice through professional development opportunities, learning about theory, having those theories demonstrated in a workshop, giving participants practice time to learn what those techniques look like and practice them so they feel comfortable. None of that really matters. Only get 5% transfer to student outcomes. The thing that makes the difference is coaching. When teachers receive support from their peers, from an external expert, they can and should be able to transfer to practice 99% of what they've learned. So that speaks to the importance of having coaching support. Now, in our classroom modeling and coaching, we use a gradual release. Most of you are familiar with what that means. That's the I do, where the mentor models the lessons, the you do, where mentor and teacher co-teach the lessons, and the you do, did I say we do? The we do here, and then the you do, where the teacher teaches the lessons. And we use that gradual release of responsibility and cycle through the year as new learning is taking place. I mentioned Costa and Garmston as the two individuals who really, I think, put forward this idea of cognitive coaching. And what that is our coaches learning personal interaction techniques similar to those used by various and sundry counselors. And the goal of this coaching is to facilitate a teacher's ability to direct themselves to learn. And the way they do that is through reflection, through taking the time and thinking about what they're doing and why. So our cognitive coaches, our mentors, collaborate with teachers in their planning and in their instruction. They're helping them build their knowledge and their skills outside the classrooms so that they can then transfer that to their instruction in the classroom. And we use a coaching cycle with a planning conference. The planning conference clarify goals and look at student data and use that to plan the lesson. And then we have the observation, the lesson and the observation where the lesson is implemented and data is gathered through that lesson. And then a reflection conference where the teacher and mentor sit side by side to talk about the lesson. So I mentioned that I wanted to cover 4 aspects of online professional development. And the first I mentioned was knowing your audience. Knowing your audience with interactive technology. Now, this is different than what we've been doing face-to-face. And yet, virtual coaching can and must mimic face-to-face interactions because that's really how we communicate with each other as humans, right? With the total body-brain system. We use verbal cues, like I'm doing now, my words, but I can also use nonverbal cues, with my facial expression and my tone, even my hands. I can emphasize things with gestures. And these interactions are synchronous. That means they allow the teacher and the coach to see one another while these coaching conversations are happening. Platforms that are most widely used to do this are Zoom, which we're using today here, and Google Meet, but there are others as well. And I'm sure that because of the circumstances right now, there will be even more that we can't even fathom what their possibilities are. In order to know your audience, you need to know what your teacher's role is in the school and also what resources are available. So when I talk about the teacher's role, I'm specifically talking about whether they're a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher, a reading interventionist, or a literacy coach. And we also want to know what grade level they teach, because that will matter. We also need to know what the demographic of their students are. Again, this matters. Are there, high percentages of children from low socioeconomic status? Are there high percentages of English learners? Are there high percentages of children who are identified with special education as students needing special education? And then what does the teacher use to teach reading? Do they have core reading programs that they use? That matters, because that core reading program is going to need to be followed with some manner of fidelity. Or do they use guided reading or balanced literacy? Again, we need to know what tools the teachers use and what programs the teachers use. What professional development have they received in the past to be able to teach using these materials and programs? And then what resources do they have available to them? A common teacher profile that we see in many of our schools is many of our teachers use Readers and Writers Workshop as the way that they teach reading and writing. I would say by and large, at least 40% of the teacher's students score below the benchmark goals based on their universal screening composite scores. Oftentimes, we are coaching teachers in the application and implementation of word study, which is, to use Emily Hanford's term, often a phonics patch that's incorporated into a literacy block. And this is very common to hear a teacher say that the district keeps adding more initiatives or giving them more materials and things that they have to do, but they never seem to have enough time to get it all done. So we want to make sure that we're helping the teachers by having a coaching plan to support them. And that coaching plan's purpose is to move each teacher to a level of use. This is a term that's used in cognitive coaching, where they're not only acquiring new knowledge, but they're also learning how to apply that in practice. In order to really move the needle and get teachers to embrace the changes that are necessitated, we have to develop trust. And we do that through acknowledging what their concerns are and really hearing what they are most concerned about. And then we'll start with an instructional strategy that addresses those concerns. So it could be something very simple, or it could be more complicated depending on what their specific concerns are about reading and literacy. And then that gradual release cycle or gradual release model will help us as we work through the coaching cycle that I talked about earlier. The second aspect of coaching that I want to talk about is the importance of differentiating our support. And we talked a little bit about knowing your audience, and we can differentiate our support based on the teacher's role, et cetera. It's also very helpful to know what their knowledge is and what their ability to apply that in practice is. So when, if possible, we recommend that you administer a knowledge survey. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but it really does help us to know where the teacher is in this knowledge piece. It also activates their prior knowledge on a specific topic, so kind of gets them thinking about what the topics are that we will be delving into. We also know that it helps calibrate their knowledge. When they can see how much knowledge is necessary for them to get the job done, really helps them realize how much they need to know and how complex reading is. And then it encourages them to learn new information as they go through the process. And speaking of that process, we also want to monitor their progress in terms of building knowledge and being able to apply their knowledge in practice. So we can develop pop quizzes during our professional development, our online professional development, using questions and answers to check for their understanding. And if we're able to observe them teaching, which I recommend, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, we can use some literacy protocols or checklists to document how successful they are at implementing those strategies. And I'll just show you a screenshot of that in a minute. So for the knowledge surveys, we've used something called Socrative. There's also a great app called Kahoot. And this is a screenshot of an actual survey that we did on foundational knowledge with a group of teachers. You can see that they do not put their name on the survey. They use their smartphones to do this. They take the survey and they see how they do, if they're getting the answers right or not. But we can't see individual scores, right? And you can see just with this little screenshot, there were 11 questions in this survey, and we had 27% on the first question, 23% on question number 11, as high as 92% on one of the questions. So the knowledge range is the point of this. And when we have that range of knowledge, it's going to really be best and most optimum if we can differentiate according to that knowledge. And then this is the screenshot of a literacy protocol that I mentioned. This has to do with phonological and phonemic awareness. And what you really want to just pay attention to on this slide is that we're looking at specific aspects of instruction that will tell us if they're able to apply the knowledge that they're learning about the topic. So the point of all this is differentiating based on many different factors, but also giving and providing different levels of support. So this is something that a group of our mentors put together for one of our districts to provide virtual support over the coming weeks. And you can see that there's some self-paced learning that we are asking the teachers to engage in. There's live group discussions that will happen, in this case, on Google Hangout, maybe on Zoom too. And then we have weekly office hours, so we can offer support to teachers on an individual basis. And then we're also going to provide distance learning tips, because all of our teachers are, of course, working with children remotely, and we recognize that they need a lot of support to be able to do that. So as you can see, there are many different ways that we can support our teachers with this kind of a coaching plan. And then I mentioned that if we are able to observe some of our teachers actually teaching, which one of our districts is doing structured literacy work with us now, and we're coaching many of their teachers across the district. And we want those teachers to continue to follow the scope and sequence that introduce you for lesson plan development. And then we can still use that coaching cycle format that I talked about earlier, where they're going to plan together, they're going to deliver the lesson, either the mentor or the teacher, and will reflect. If we are invited to take part in their teaching sessions, again, this is virtually, we can even co-teach with them, or we can observe with a lesson plan as a guide. giving them immediate feedback through this reflective coaching conversation that I mentioned earlier, and then working with the teacher to plan subsequent lessons based on the prior lesson. The third aspect of virtual coaching that I want to talk a little bit about are these rules of engagement. How are we going to be sure that our teachers are paying attention, that they're excited to learn new information, that they're engaged in the learning, because we're not seeing them face to face. And certainly, even if we have Zoom technology and we can look at the individual people involved sitting in the rooms in front of us, it's harder to watch the body language. So we do want to think about how can we establish these professional learning communities with the teachers that are coming to us for virtual learning. And we do want to spend time building that community of learners. And we do want to encourage each teacher in that professional learning community, that PLC, to share what they're having success with and what they're feeling challenged to do, and problem solve with them. That's the point of a professional learning community. Always, we have to focus on student assessment data. So that keeps things very student focused and also objective, so we don't get too far off our target. And then in order to support the teachers in these communities, we want to make sure that we, as the experts looking at what's available for teachers, that we make resources available to them and update those resources frequently. We are working with teachers in these communities of learning. We want to think about how we can facilitate our focused discussions to, again, engage them. So we can ask open-ended questions and ask teachers to respond to them. Zoom has a feature that allows you to assign teachers within a group to breakout rooms, which I think is a great way to break up groups if they're large, and then also to be able to monitor chats while you're working with the teachers. Another way to facilitate these focused discussions is to find videos. We have quite a few on our YouTube channel, but there are lots of other videos out there, and select a video that's specific to that topic, show the video, and engage teachers in an analysis of that video by using a discussion guide that really breaks the video down into smaller components for focused conversations. The last topic I want to touch on this afternoon before we turn to our questions and answers is the importance of engaging administrators. And I mentioned that one of our districts, which we have the pleasure of working in almost all of the elementary schools, has asked us to continue our face-to-face coaching online. And the first step we had to take in order to make this happen was to ensure that the principals in each of the schools was on board with this, and that the principal would talk to the teachers and make it clear that the expectation was that they would continue to engage with us in this online learning. And fortunately, one of the administrators in this district, actually not just one, many, but one in particular who's in charge of curriculum instruction, was very enthusiastic and directed the principals to engage with us. That's really important to have your administrators behind this. So what is the administrator's role in ensuring that virtual coaching is successful? Well, first, the principal and the mentor have to meet to discuss what the scope of that will be, and changed a month ago. Our world changed dramatically. We had to think about what would that role be and what would the scope of our work be. Once we scope that work out, we want to make sure that we have an information session that involves the principal and the teachers so that they understand what the expectation is. And it doesn't necessarily come from us because we can't tell the teachers that they have to do this work. The principal, the administrator, really is the person that has to convey that information. The principal will join professional development sessions whenever possible. That is so important. It doesn't happen as often as we'd like, but we never stop asking. The principal also has to ensure that the teachers have time in their schedule to attend and participate in this coaching. Again, that's really important. So every school district is doing their work in a different way. We work with many districts across the state of Connecticut, and each one has a different expectation. And so we can't say it has to be this or that, but what we can do is, again, ask principals and administrators to make sure that the teachers are given time to do this work with us. And then to check in frequently so that we know if it's going well, and if it isn't, what can we do to make sure it gets back on track. And the principal also has to monitor what's happening on the teacher's part. Again, I can't say this enough. Without administrators' support, it's very difficult for us to do the work that we need to do. And we know how much teachers want and need the support, and we want to give it to them however we can. So you saw this earlier. This is, again, the screenshot of a literacy protocol. If we can help teachers understand what the expectation is for applying their knowledge and get principals to support that, that makes our job much easier. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that we can have a conversation and I can answer the questions that came to me a few days ago. So I will say again, because Sanja said this earlier, but I will reiterate that many of the questions that you asked me to answer were questions related to working directly with students. And that isn't really the focus of our work at the moment. So after having a conversation with Sanja and Denise, we decided that we would focus on providing the support to teachers today, and we'll have a follow-up seminar or webinar to talk about supporting students in their classrooms the next time, or not the next time, but at some point in the near future. So I did take a look at the questions you asked, and I selected a few that have to do with supporting teachers. The first question that came in here was, how do I get started? I have so many resources at my fingertips in the real world, but I feel at a loss when teaching online. And you know what? So do we, and so did we, and feeling better. If you could see my space now, I have a nice big giant dining room table. I put all the leaves in it, and I have all my materials spread out. So if you have a home office and you have dedicated space to spread out your materials and your supplies, recommend that you have those close at hand, that you organize them. Organization is always really, really important. So organize your materials by topic. And then when you are preparing a specific professional development for teachers, you're just going to want to make sure you have the materials for that specific topic. Many of the materials, by the way, that you use in your classrooms are materials that you use in professional development, are materials that you would use for virtual coaching, right? You can hold things up. I've been working with a preschool group. So I have my letters here. I have a little activity going on a trip that we use for phonological awareness. I have books. I have things that I can hold and show the teachers what it looks like, because we all are very concrete visual learners. So make sure you have lots of fun stuff to show people. Another question, how can I make online instruction more interactive and engaging? And there were lots of questions about this, because engagement is important for kids, but it's important for kids of all ages, right? We all want and need to be engaged, especially if we're spending lots of time in front of screens. Absolutely important that we figure out how to do that. And I wish I had more tricks. I know I'll find out more about how to do this as time goes on, and my mentors who are doing this work will share. But I wrote down a few things here. You want to make sure you are seeing your audience so you can mimic that face-to-face interaction that I talked about earlier. When possible, ask your participants to turn on their videos. A lot of times they're not comfortable doing that. I have noticed that people are more comfortable now than they were at first. We don't care what your hair looks like. We don't care if you have whatever you're wearing, right? You can wear your pajamas on the bottom and put on a nicer shirt on top. It doesn't really matter. It's really important that we can look at people's eyes and facial expressions to make sure that they're engaged. Put your screen in gallery mode. That really helps too. That's a tip that we learned right away. So up on the upper right-hand screen side of your screen, if you're doing Zoom, there's something that looks like a grid or a waffle. If you click on that, you'll see everybody the same size distributed across the screen. And then you can get a feel like you're actually in a room with a group of individuals. Ask your participants questions along the way. So stop, give them think time, and then ask questions. I was shocked last week. I did a workshop for 29 pre-K teachers, and I stopped and asked quite a few questions, and it was very gratifying to hear lots of them chiming in. Takes a little while to get used to because we do say best practice, mute your mic because you don't get the feedback as much, but they just have to unmute and say what they want to say and then mute again. But it is really important to get people to answer questions. And if you're sharing your screen, have them choral read. So if I want them to make sure they're following along, you can have them choral read some of your slides. I like to do that with quotes particularly. You may have noticed that I don't read every single bullet exactly the way it's written, but a quote is meant to be read verbatim. I would say that you want to limit your sessions to 2 hours, right? You could do 1 hour sessions. That's fine. 2 hours are probably great. I don't think you can do much longer than that effectively and keep people's attention. Not to mention the fact that many of our teachers have children at home that they have to be paying attention to as well. And of course, they also have their students that they have to be working with. So 2 hour sessions, I think, should be maximum. Another question, how best to teach in an explicit and systematic way virtually? So to that, I would say explicit and systematic is important. Same meaning, whether you're face-to-face in the same room with people or if you're looking at a screen. So I define explicit as the concepts and skills that must be taught directly and then practice. So when you're working with a group of teachers and you explicitly teach them a skill, you want to build in practice time. And again, you're not always going to be able to hear them, but you can at least know and see by looking at screens that they're engaging in whether it's reading something, spelling, whatever it may be. Or you can do breakout rooms, like I mentioned before, and give them some time to practice with a small group. It's a great technique when you have large groups. Systematic has to do with using a logically ordered sequence of skills that progress from simple to complex. And most of us who teach structured literacy use a scope and sequence. It's really important, not most, I believe all, they all should. And it's really important that your teachers understand what that scope and sequence is. They know what the roadmap is, that they know what the expectation is for where they are in a progression of skills and learning those skills. Another question that came in is, how can I differentiate for all my teachers remotely? And again, that was something I talked about earlier, and I don't think that I can say loudly enough how important it is to differentiate. Of course, it's challenging to do that. It is very challenging to differentiate. Even in the real world, we often have professional development workshops where we have K-5 teachers together in a room, and we may have 50 teachers. And some of the teachers are gen ed teachers, some are special ed teachers. They wear different hats. They have different levels of knowledge. So it's no different when you're working with a group of teachers virtually. We still want to think about ways to differentiate the instruction. I did show you a coaching plan that my mentors came up with, and I mentioned office hours. And I think the idea here is that if a teacher feels that they really need some one-on-one time, and our mentor has time to give that teacher to, whether it's to reteach a concept or to troubleshoot something that they're struggling with some of their own students, I do think that's a great way to differentiate and keep teachers engaged at the same time. Another question here said, how can I keep it fun in the virtual classroom? And again, I think we're going to learn how to do that in ways that we never thought about before. But I think about what I would do in a workshop and how do I keep it fun? I get teachers to stand up and, act things out. I get teachers to choral read. I make light of things. One of my mentors, who's been with me for 20 years, is fantastic at doing this. And when we have workshops in our offices, the teachers laugh all the time. And I think it's just her sense of humor and her lightheartedness, and she just has a way of making people laugh. So however you can do that, I think it's even more important now that we keep this as light and as refreshing and as fun as we can. What else did I write here? I think I covered it. Next question. Any suggestions on how to adapt for different age groups or groups of different sizes? And as I mentioned earlier, doing the breakout groups is a great way to do that. There is also the chat feature that I'm sure most of you have seen on Zoom, and they probably have it on other platforms as well. The challenge with the chat feature is if you're doing a workshop and working with teachers virtually, you're trying to manage your screen, share your screen, look at the participants, put people into breakout groups. It absolutely takes time to get used to the technology and to feel comfortable with it. So that just is a matter of doing it and doing it over and over again, and you'll become more comfortable and more fluid with it. I think if you have an opportunity to have a colleague join you and co-present, that also is really ideal, particularly if you have a number of people. I mentioned last week, I did a series of workshops with roughly 28, 29, 30 teachers, and I invited a couple of my mentors to join me, and they watched the screen for the chats, and they chimed in when they had a great idea. So I think now more than ever, if you can do this work with a friend, with a colleague, then I think it just makes it easier to engage your audience and work on those different levels. As I mentioned, the breakout function is great because if you have a large group, you can break out the group by level, as far as what grade level they teach, the role that they play. You can break them into different rooms based on that. So they're called breakout rooms. And if you, again, are able to get a sense for what the skill level is of your teachers, you could even break the group up into levels. Now that is a little challenging because you're acknowledging that some people know more than others, and teachers don't always feel good about that necessarily. So I think that that's something that you have to be sensitive to. When I use that Socrative app, and I've used it many, many times with great, great success, I think there was an acknowledgement on teachers' part. I was actually quite surprised when teachers were honest and said, oh, that was me. I didn't know the answer to that question. Or I got 50% on the quiz and she got a 90%. She knows a lot more. You know, that was so gratifying to know that the teachers were transparent about that. They were open enough that they really wanted to, they were starting to acknowledge that they needed to know a lot more. So I think that being able to get teachers into those differentiated groups by skill level will really help make this work a little easier, because then you can actually go deeper with the content. The last question is one that I struggled with. So I'm going to ask it, and then I'm going to see, I don't know if Denise is monitoring people's questions or answers or chats or what have you, but the question is, they were interested in learning about unique ways to share information with teachers that doesn't involve a website, Zoom, or online session. Why? Because as I mentioned, and I don't need to tell you all, teachers are currently inundated with webinars, with screen time, online learning sessions. So they're feeling online web fatigue. And I think that we can all relate to that. So one thought I had, and again, this is part of the coaching plan that our mentors put together, and something that we actually try to engage a lot is gauge teachers in, is we have them do homework. So maybe now more than ever, teachers could take the time to read an article and print it out and read it in print. Marianne Wolf and many researchers are telling us that print reading is especially when you're reading technical material and material that's challenging to process and synthesize. Print the article out if you can, read it, highlight it, take notes, and then, you know, have some platform for getting teachers to talk about that, that article, or at the very least, bring it back with them, their ideas and their thoughts that they can share the next time they're together with their peers in these professional learning communities. So that's the end of the Q&A. As I said, most of your questions were more relevant for teaching children versus teaching teachers. So I don't have any other questions that are relevant to that. And we don't have chat feature on this particular Zoom unless there's a way to bring any of these questions in. Sanja, I don't know if you have any, we have a few minutes left.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm communicating with Denise, but I actually did have a question, and that is, given all that you've talked about, how do you get the attention of the administrators so that teachers can get that support that they need? What are some strategies, or can you recommend, you know, some things that we can do as a community?
To raise, sorry, Denise just sent me a little text, so I was distracted. Sorry, Sanja, can you restate the question?
Yes, just really, how do we influence those administrators and principals and people who really need to give that support to our teachers out there? Are there any strategies to doing that?
So I'm really glad you asked that question, because I did mention that Socrative app, and an instruction at this district that I mentioned earlier invited me to do a series of workshops for the principals because we were going to be working in a number of these schools. And she recognized the fact that the principals needed to know what our process was, needed to know to some extent what our content was. And I asked her if I could administer a knowledge survey to them. And she said, sure, tell me more about it. I explained it to her. What was fascinating is, first of all, how competitive they were. They really wanted to do well on the survey, and yet they did fairly poorly. And that wasn't a surprise to me because many administrators are not literacy experts. They may have taught math in high school. They could even have been a PE teacher. That's not uncommon. So we know that in order to ensure that principals are behind us and supporting our work, when I say our work, the work that we do as coaches, whether you're external coach or an internal coach, they need to understand why teachers need a lot of professional development, why they need so much support. And the only way that we can get them there is if they become aware of the complexity of reading. So engaging them in these Socrative surveys, that was very, very powerful. I think we've also used Emily Hanford's podcasts very, very effectively. And we've structured it so that the principals can listen to a podcast together in a principals meeting and engage with each other in new learning and conversations about what are the implications for their teachers not having this, knowing the science of reading, and what do they as administrators need to do. We've also had the principals playing the podcast with their teachers and co-facilitating with a mentor, a conversation again, related to why this content is really important. So it's a really, really important question you're asking, Sanja. And I think that however you can, whatever ways you can use to support the principals and the administrators understanding knowledge, this content knowledge and this science of reading is important. We're not expecting them to become experts. That's not the point, but they must become aware of why their teachers need the support that they do. And also they need to be aware so that they're the decision makers. They're the ones who are selecting the materials in many cases, whether usually they're at the district level, but they're the ones who are selecting the core reading programs or the instructional methods. They're the ones who are securing the professional development expertise of people. And if they don't really subscribe to the science of reading, then they're not going to make informed choices. So yeah, it's a really important question. Denise also did have a question about resources and materials, because I did mention that it would be great to have teachers reading a list of what I would refer to as seminal articles that are relevant to specific topics. And IDA has a phenomenal document, Knowledge and Practice Standards. Many of you are familiar with it. If you're not, you can find it on the IDA website. And it includes a great list, a terrific bibliography that's organized by domain. So you can go to that list and you can find articles that are really important for building teachers' background knowledge about the science of reading. And some are, I'd say most of the articles that are there are articles that are teacher friendly. And by that, I mean, they're articles that talk about the application of the knowledge. And that's what they're most concerned about and need to learn more about. The other great resource is perspectives. So I'm sure those of you who are members of IDA receive perspectives on language and literacy. It is published 4 times a year, and it's got great articles that are relevant to teachers' practice.
Great, great. So I just want to thank you, Margie, for doing such a wonderful presentation, and thank you for just giving your time. For those of you who may have missed the opening, there were a couple of announcements that I made. One being that we will be having a part 2 to this particular webinar, where we will talk about innovative teaching strategies for distance learning. I believe in the Facebook chat, many of you still had questions about that topic. And so just know that we are going to fast track that. We aim to please, so we're going to fast track that and make sure that we offer that webinar. And then our assistive technology webinar is also coming up. So please stay tuned on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, our website. We send out e-blasts twice a week. So we'll make sure that you stay informed. And if you actually registered, we will be also updating you. Again, I want to thank you all for participating. We hope that you register for the next webinar. And one more plug for the COVID Relief Fund, in that go down to your description box if you're in YouTube and click that link to donate. And if you're on Facebook, go to that donate page or that donate button and make that donation. Our goal is to not turn any child down who need our help and our services. And so we're really, really going to be very aggressive about this campaign. Again, thank you so much, Margie. You were great. Thanks, everyone. And see you in a week or two with the next webinar. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.